Hey everybody, TacticAngel back on the PlayStation 5 to take a look at another ship in World of Warships Legends. This time it's the Jaeger, an Austro-Hungarian destroyer that appears in-game as a premium Tier 7 Pan-European destroyer. For this review, I'll start with some history, move into analysis, discuss commanders a little, run down the stats, and finish off with some gameplay, of course. If you want to skip around though, you should see some time codes in the description. Following the completion of the Tetra class of ships, which we have in-game as a premium ship at Tier 2, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, like all other naval powers at the time, began looking for new designs to create ever more modern and capable destroyers. One of the distinguishing elements of Austria-Hungary and its navy was its lack of overseas ambition. While most of the empires of Europe were spreading influence throughout the world, Austria-Hungary was noticeably not, encompassing a territory that not only includes modern-day Austria and Hungary, but also Czechia, Slovakia, Croatia, Slovenia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and parts of Italy, Poland, Ukraine, Romania, and Serbia. The empire had a significant coastline with the Adriatic Sea, but also, implicit to that list, more than a little internal multicultural interest balancing to do. In fact, implicit to the name of Austria-Hungary is that this was a dual monarchy with 3 standing armies, one for Austria, one for Hungary, and one for the empire, and delicate, if not baroque, political arrangements to keep the whole thing unified and functional. As such, creating overseas colonial interests was an unreasonable political hurdle, which means that Austria-Hungary had a very different set of objectives when building a navy. If the Austro-Hungarian navy was never expected to have to sail out of the Adriatic into the wider Mediterranean, ships could be better armed, armored, or achieve parity with rivals on less weight, since they would not need to be carrying around quite as much fuel. That was, at least, the theory behind the creation of the Tatra class and the ships that came before. The early war saw the Imperial and Royal War Navy lose 2 of its 6 Tatras, and operational experience showed that earlier assumptions about needed range and endurance greatly underestimated what units would actually need to be capable of, since the Navy was based primarily out of Pola, modern-day Pola, and would need to traverse a pretty considerable amount of the Adriatic to get into a fight or even patrol the southernmost holdings of the empire. In 1917, the Marine Technisches Committee, abbreviated MTK in German, ordered several new designs of a flotilla leader of up to 1,600 tons, with smaller torpedo boats weighing less than half of that at first. Since these designs were not expected to have the needed endurance, additional designs of 1,000 tons for the torpedo boats and 2,000 tons for the destroyer leaders were ordered. That's where we finally get the Jaeger. What we see here in game is an approximation of a 2,000-ton destroyer leader, armed with 4 5.9-inch main battery, 6 torpedo tubes, and 4 2.6-inch guns to provide World War I levels of AA cover. The class was expected to have an 1,800-mile endurance, cruising at 23 knots, and reaching a maximum speed somewhere near 34 knots. It probably goes without saying that the depiction of the design that you see in-game takes some liberties, not the least of which is the number of guns seem to have gone down by 1, and the number of torpedoes seems to have increased quite a bit. The reason why these are ultimately just designs and never saw service is really twofold. With a 30-month construction time, the MTK designs were not expected to enter service until 1921, and even then it was not expected that they would change the course of the war, so they were cancelled. Austria-Hungary also ceased to be an empire in 1918, following the Astor Revolution and myriad treaties and other dictates that followed. What was left of the Kaiserliche und Königliche Kriegsmarine was transferred to other nations or scrapped. That included some of the surviving Tatra class, and there's a pretty good chance, had these MTK destroyers been started, they would have never even been completed in that case. As for the Jaeger in-game, she's the second pan-European premium destroyer at Tier 7 next to the Friesland, but she couldn't be more different than that Dutch destroyer. In fact, she has more in common with Yudachi and some other torpedo-centered destroyers. As for the reason it's likely to get compared to ships like Yudachi, it has a ton of torpedoes. In fact, it has 4 launchers, each housing 3 fish. If 12 torpedoes doesn't seem like enough, you also come with 2 reload boosters, which are definitely nice to have in a pinch, but even without them, the torpedoes on Jaeger reload very quickly. All of these torpedoes come with a pretty impressive 12-kilometer range, probably because there aren't really abilities available to Pan-European commanders to improve that much. And in spite of their awfully long range, they come with excellent speed, which will help them more accurately put torpedoes on target. Like other Pan-European destroyers, they can be shot in either narrow or very narrow spreads, depending on your preference. That might be an advantage, and it might be a disadvantage, because it can help you put more danger pylons on target at longer ranges. Or you could miss them all. Unfortunately, if you hit, they don't have too much effect on target. Even ignoring saturation, there's a very real chance you'll have to put 3 torpedoes into an enemy destroyer in order to kill it. Against larger targets with 70,000 hit points, that number can very quickly balloon to more than the normal 12 torpedoes that you have available at one time. And it creates a dependency on doing damage over time through flooding, which most torpedo boats don't have to rely so heavily upon. Another issue Jaeger will face is that she has a great deal of difficulty defending herself. You have a very small number of guns, they don't do a particularly good amount of damage over time, and perhaps more importantly than even that, using them is more dangerous than in other destroyers. You might risk being shot a little to get a permanent fire going on a battleship with almost any other destroyer, including the Somers or Yudachi, but those ships have smoke, and every other smokeless destroyer out there is a lot less capable of fighting off its opponents if spotted by another destroyer. Though fast enough to keep most spotted targets out of her sea detectability, Jaeger doesn't have the kind of speed that you want to be able to get out of range if you let someone into that sea detectability. This becomes a particularly bad problem if you should ever find yourself in a battle opposite a carrier, because Jaeger has no smoke and functionally no AA either. That probably limits the appeal of Jaeger to folks who really love torpedo boats, as long as they are comfortable with the prospect that they will have to approach radar battleships and cruisers with even more apprehension, and they will be at a disadvantage against almost every other destroyer it can face. As far as commanders, we can blow through this pretty fast, because since there are so few viable options, we might as well be explicit. Swirsky is a gunboat commander. Jaeger doesn't have a lot of guns, ergo, not a lot of reason for gun skills. So yeah, you have 2 paths to radio position finding, and only perceptive really makes sense. You're going to have a very narrow path to use him if you really want to, and the only really good reason you might want to take him is because his base trait, and then go full concealment. Similarly, Hilfrich is the Dutch Dewey, so some of his skills are meant for cruisers and battleships. The one cruiser skill that could be interesting is fully packed, since it will give you 3 extra consumables, though you won't be able to keep your engine and rudder going with that. Stand or fall is also an interesting choice, which could make for some even more ridiculous torpedo reload speeds, provided that you first take a good amount of damage. His base trait is going to help a little more with speed, though to be honest I'm not sure how the game rounds fractional AA damage. He might give you somewhere between 0 and 2 additional damage per second. So naturally you're probably going to end up with Stig Eriksson. His base trait will help you do up to an additional 225 damage per torpedo, and some other less useful things. Mostly what you're going to be getting from him is a bit more choice and by far the best torpedo reload speed. If you're feeling particularly daring, you can also make the Jaeger just that much more squishy and nearly as stealthy, but not quite as stealthy, as a full Swirsky build. By all means, play the game however you like, but I think the perception here is that Eriksson is probably the only sensible choice among historic commanders, unless you're looking to do something brave or silly. As we jump into stats, everything that you will see here are base statistics, except for the concealment, which does include the camo that comes with the ship. Since Jaeger is so different from other Pan-European destroyers, expect to hear a lot more comparisons with Yudachi and Somers instead, since those are the 2 other torpedo boats that are also food for aircraft carriers. Starting with survivability, Jaeger has a not so great 15,900 hit points, about 2,000 below average, though 2,700 points more sturdy than the Yudachi. None of the armor is going to matter, like on most destroyers. and you have no torpedo protection as is normal. We'll talk a bit about heals later, so you can keep yourself in the game for a while longer, and Jaeger's survivability is not as grim as it might appear here, provided you don't take all the damage at once. Jaeger also only has 3 guns. This is 1 forward, 1 aft, and 1 situated between your superstructure. Good news is that the front and rear turrets have 360-degree rotation, and without that, it would be nice if the third turret faced rearward, since there's basically no ship in the game that you want to get into a gunfight with. Though you should still be able to marginally outgun the Yudachi. This is with 3 150mm guns. They do 2200 HE damage, similar to the Z-23, but you have a more respectable 4-second reload, even if you shed 1% of your fire chance. The turret rotation is definitely slow at 18 seconds. The AP obviously does a bit more damage. Admittedly, I haven't found the occasion where it was reasonable to test whether this thing can punch a cruiser's belt, or at what angle, or range. Chances are you're going to stick with the HE, and there's at least some chance that you'll never shoot your guns at all. Overall, the individual guns aren't exactly bad, and if you had 4 of them, you'd actually be a pretty average destroyer. Even with 3, you're not lowest in DPM, but the ships that do have similar or lower DPM, all of them have quite a bit more HP than you, and most of them have smoke. That means, though some would characterize these as guns that you should never use, that's not precisely true, but using them does put you in a uniquely precarious position. Your torpedoes are a different story, at least in terms of numbers. Jaeger comes with 4 launchers, each with 3 torpedoes. That's a lot of fish, and on the bright side, they reach out to 12 kilometers. Unfortunately, they do a pathetic 7,533 damage. On a per torpedo basis, that's less than half of what you would expect on a tier 7 destroyer, and that's even 3,400 less than the Austian-Hungarian's torpedoes. The torpedoes are pretty fast at 86 knots and have a large 1.9 kilometer detectability, again larger than Austian-Hungarian. This will make them reasonably good at hitting relatively unmaneuverable targets, but somewhat less of a sure thing than you'd expect with so much speed. Overall, Jaeger's got a bit more than 3/4 your average torpedo DPM, which it can augment with a torpedo reload booster. Against the torpedo boats I've mentioned, it's about 40% less than the Yudachi or Somers, and one of those also has access to a torpedo reload booster. The other just has more torpedoes that deal north of 10,000 damage more per torpedo than yours. Where you're going to try to make this work is by hitting often, causing floods, and doing damage over time. The very fast torpedo reload is arguably supposed to allow you to do that. Next comes your anti-air, which is an unqualified catastrophe. It's got 2 more damage per second than Yudachi, but at just 13 and with no flak, if you were to divide a random number, let's say 2,676, by 13, you're going to come up with around 3 minutes and 36 seconds to shoot down a single aircraft. Some will take less time than that. But there's no carrier that you can face that won't regenerate planes faster than you can shoot them down, even if they were to fly them over top you the entire game. So happy hunting, CVs. As for Jaeger players though, if you're in a game with a CV, it's just about the worst seat on the struggle bus. Jaeger's maneuverability is a mixed bag. Having 39 knots of speed is really pretty great, and will at least help you run away from almost every target. It's also something I'm sure the designers over at Blum & Voss would have been pretty surprised at with 1917 boilers. Your 670 meter turning circle is a bit worse than average, and the 3.7 second rudder is just a bit better. This combination does make dodging torpedoes feel kind of bad, which I think you can also chalk up to the length of this thing more than anything else. But it is good for map control. When we come to concealment, Jaeger has fairly average concealment overall, and it comes pretty much in the middle of the less stealthy and significantly better gun Somers and the stealthy torpedo king Yudachi. Its 3 kilometer detectability from air is best at the tier, and it matches the long range AA that you have on the ship, which means that you can either leave your AA on or turn it off, whichever is less deleterious to your morale. Because, as we've discussed, it will make near as no difference whether it's on or off. 2.9 while firing in smoke is surprisingly bad for a destroyer, but it would be strange to say this, at least you have no smoke. So yeah, let's talk about consumables. You have a destroyer damage control party, nothing special. You have an engine boost, same as usual, 2 charges that increase your speed for 8% for a couple minutes with a 3-minute recharge. Next, you have a repair party, and that's going to sort of help your unimpressive HP. Each one of these will give you 158 hit points per second for 14 seconds. So if you can keep from getting yourself dev struck, there's at least a fighting chance you'll have something functionally closer to 20,300 hit points. And that would be pretty good. Keep in mind that this is also percentage based, so if you take sims, the amount healed will be slightly higher. And if you take fully packed, you're going to get 3 of these, though I still wouldn't suggest getting into any knife fights with functionally around 23,000 hit points. Last, and certainly not least, you get 2 torpedo reload boosters. They have a 4-minute recharge and will reset your torpedo reload to just 5 seconds. It's useful, but not as useful as you might find on other ships, because your torpedoes already reload really fast, so it's not saving you nearly as much time, and your torpedoes don't do very much damage, so you're not really getting as much bang for your buck. I'm not saying this is bad, but torpedo reload boosters are like jingling keys in front of a baby sometimes. In this case, it's just less impressive. So, blah, 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 blah. Let's get into some gameplay. Finally. We're going to be on Crash Zone. I'll go ahead and put my commander up on the screen. We are, of course, using Stig Eriksson. Nothing here is particularly creative, and I see no advantage to being creative in this ship. Basically, we're just trying to get as much torpedo reload and damage and whatnot as we can. I made the observation that there are a lot of torpedoes on the ship and not very many guns, so it seems like a solid choice. As we look at who's in the game, we've got a fairly minimal amount of radar. There are 2 American cruisers out there that we're going to need to keep our eye on, but everything else is pretty doable. Now, immediately starting out the game, we have Fletcher out there. I'm glad to see him, even though I have no intentions whatsoever of going out there and actually shooting at him. Obviously, Fletcher, very good gunboat. Me, not so much. We are paying a little bit of attention to where we think he might be going, because if we can get some early hits on him, we can make everybody's life just a little bit easier. This isn't exactly a great strategy in terms of how you use your time, but in the early couple of minutes of the game, while everybody's kind of getting into position, it's not going to hurt you that much to dump all of your torpedoes all at once. If I were to shoot my torpedoes towards the Jean Bart, I would expect to not get a lot out of it, just because he's kind of far away. He has a pretty good chance of backing up towards the edge of the map, as kind of all random Jean Barts do. And then also you have kind of the situation where he's bow into me anyway, so it would be hard to land too many shots on him. Now we're keeping 1 in reserve here. I think the way that you're supposed to play this ship, if at all possible, is to get your torpedoes kind of on like a 2-and-2 sort of situation, where you'll fire 2 sets, wait, 20-30 seconds, fire the other 2 sets, and then it kind of cycles from there. If you think about this in the same way that you would be playing the Ostergotland, the whole idea there is to either start a fire, then cause a flood, or cause a flood and then start a fire. And then you do a lot of your money making in that ship off of damage over time. If you're doing something similar in this ship, which you can definitely do, you're going to have to do it almost entirely with floods, though you still do technically have guns. The guns do work, but torpedoes are better. But in order to do that, you're going to want to make sure that you always have 2 of your torpedoes ready or close to ready. 2 on, 2 off sort of idea, just so you don't hit somebody with all your torpedoes all at once and then they damage con and then you wait a minute. Now I will mention that we just heard the voiceover for this particular ship. It is, in fact, in Polish. Now, I have nothing against Polish. I can't speak it, except for a few key phrases, and they're exactly the ones that Polish grandmothers would not want to hear. But anyway, it's a curious choice for a ship that has a German name, represents a country with a lot of German-speaking nobility, and whose ships were most likely crewed by people who actually lived by the Adriatic, which is not Poland. Now, I am going to go ahead and break my own rule here and dump all my torpedoes because this is just kind of a word to the wise, but if you drop a smoke screen within 9 kilometers of an American radar cruiser and he's paying attention, it's going to look a lot like a flare gun that says, here is a destroyer. In this case, 2. So I'm going to leave. Now, thankfully, he is eating a lot of torpedoes. We have 4 there and finish him off. Not bad. So we're going to go ahead and continue in this same direction because we really don't have much of a choice at this point. You can see it's 2-2. We've got the advantage in terms of caps. It looks like we are struggling, though, in terms of ships. We just lose 1 as I'm talking about how okay we're doing. In any case, as we're coming around now, this Jean Bart will hopefully be more broadside to my torpedoes, which means hopefully it will be easier to hit him. Now we're just kind of getting a feel for when he's actually going to come around. We fire 2, and the other 2, all these will pretty well flood the zone. You see we're using wide spreads because they're not really all that wide. And since we've got the 2 torpedo reload boosters and we want to try to help our other destroyer there, we're going to go ahead and launch all of those as well, because it looks a little bit like he is in some trouble. Now, one of the annoying things about this ship is because you do have to consistently keep landing torpedoes, your target is going to realize at some point that there's a destroyer shooting torpedoes at him. And our Jean Bart player here has definitely gotten hip to the wise there. And I did a pretty terrible job there too. So we're going to try plan B. This is not ideal, but it is a thing that you can do. You do actually have decent enough fire starting chance, and we know if we can get a fire on him, he will burn to death. We have, however, gathered the attention of the Akatsuki over there. So we'll go ahead and retreat. The Benham looks like he has found the Fletcher up there. And that didn't look like a very close engagement at all. We got nothing left to do here. As we come behind this island, we're just going to go ahead and dump all of these. By the time we get around this island, we will probably be pretty close to reloaded. If that destroyer has come after us, then we might just hit him with a torpedo. Now, I did know that was going to happen, but the timing is authentic because I didn't know when it was going to happen. Anyway, it looks like our torpedoes are actually kind of sailing towards the Veneto, which we wouldn't mind hitting with some torpedoes. Also, there we got a hit. Nice. up to 99,000 damage. So it's not exactly as though it's impossible to do damage in this ship. And obviously 12-kilometer torps are nice. Our guns do decent damage if we are given the opportunity. And this guy is already engaging someone else off of the other half of his ship, so we'll see if we can't help keep our players in the game just a bit longer. I don't like having to deal with a full-strength cruiser up there. Toulon is barely a cruiser, though. And it looks as though our guy is going to need some help here. Now we're going to give those some breathing room and actually demonstrate, like, probably how you're supposed to shoot these torpedoes, as opposed to dumping all of them and then waiting and dumping all of them again. You can see that our second pair are just about to half. We're kind of trying to pick which target we think we're going to be able to make a difference on. I think we're pretty well screwed in terms of Toulon. Best case scenario is that our buddy up there decides to torpedo the enemy Toulon. And by torpedo, I mean hit him with his ship. In any case, we're playing a little bit of ship psychologist, because what we were trying to do is predict where the Veneto was going to go. He's going to turn in, which means that it's actually going to shorten the amount of time it takes for those torpedoes to get there. I don't think those are going to hit anything, but on the odd chance that he does turn around and come straight south, I guess maybe. If not, by the time I get up here, I should have 2 more sets of torpedoes ready to go. This is a bad time, because obviously you can see we are the last hope for our team, and Jaeger really struggles in a carry situation. So what's going to happen here is we're going to hopefully pick up the Veneto again. Otherwise, we're just going to be glad that Toulon does not have sonar. So he should see those right towards the end. He has enough time to dodge most of them, probably due to the high visibility. And if we're really lucky, he'll get out of our cap, but he's not. We'd like just a little bit of help with the point situation. Based on what we could see, you can obviously gather that the Veneto or some other ships were going to come across or come out of that gap. It looks like kind of everyone's here, so we're going to go ahead and maybe flood this zone with a whole bunch more torpedoes. We would not be real sad if the Cheshire were to get hit by some of those too, but he's got a couple of tricks up his sleeve to keep him from running into too many torpedoes. Looks like Veneto had a moment of second thought and thankfully turns back into the torpedoes. We're starting to take some damage. You can see with the HE we can heal a lot of this. All right, maybe not a lot, but enough to last. And as we're counting down towards the end of the game, this is a bad time. But if we kill 2 people on the enemy team, we will actually win the game on points. We have 50 seconds left. Veneto's our best guess in terms of of actually killing a ship that's worth enough points to make a difference. The next closest ship is going to have to be my next target because there's just no other way about it. We're down to 26 seconds though, and that's not great. As fast as the reload is, not fast enough. 16 seconds. This is one of the few opportunities where I started to think, well, let's just see what the guns can do. We'll switch over to AP, but we're not gonna get the AP out. Fortunately for him, the game ends, because I think we all knew what was gonna happen if just a few more seconds. And that will bring us neatly along to closing thoughts on Jaeger. First, shout out to Prince Blip for directing me towards some literature on this ship's design. Researching this ship may have been one of the only bits of legitimate fun I had making this video. Playing the ship was such a ceaseless and incomprehensible joy that I didn't turn on my PlayStation for a week afterwards. Jaeger isn't much of a hunter. It's the video game demonstration of why it's generally illegal to go hunting anything larger than a rabbit with a 22. In a video game, maybe that kind of schadenfreude isn't as bad, but why you'd prefer to cross your fingers and hope your prey bleeds out inside of the 15-minute time period rather than just kill it is kind of beyond me. So Jaeger is towards the top of the list of worst campaign rewards, in my opinion, but the best part of it is that it probably won't appeal to that many people. I think a lot of people who are going to get this ship won't like it. Then, of course, most of the players who are left are probably just going to annoy the rest of us by firing a ton of torpedoes at you, hitting the reload booster, and doing it all over again maybe 5 seconds later before diving face first into a better ship, or maybe making you turn broadside to a battleship, who will of course drop a few citadels on you just because you didn't want to get hit by a torpedo that did virtually no damage. Maybe both of those things happen. Überraschung. No one has fun. In any case, I just don't see that much of a purpose for this ship. Among the torpedo boats with functionally no AA, it's pretty obviously the least impressive. You simply can't hit with 3, 4, 5, 6, 12, 16 torpedoes from any other destroyer and then watch as your target just sails away. I'm not going to keep complaining about it because really it's pretty obvious my thoughts on it, but let me know what you think down in the comments. I hope you've enjoyed the review wherever you land on Jaeger, and as always, I hope to see you on the next one.